All right, we'll move on to our next talk, Claudia Diaz from NIM, Lightning Network, Privacy Threats Towards Network Adversaries.
Thank you very much. Here's the thing. Yeah. Thanks. So hi, everyone. So, wow, it's a lot of life here. So I have two hats. So I'm an academic. I have an academic background. I'm a professor at the KU Leuven, where I did my PhD 20 years ago already, and I've been working the last 2 decades on privacy technologies. So I'm coming from the privacy world, not really from the blockchain world. And the questions I've been looking at are, okay, so how do we conceptualize privacy? How do we model it? How do we have metrics for privacy? How do we design it into systems? How do we analyze how much privacy systems are providing? And the answer is much more complex than just use CK snarks or just use Sphinx. I mean, it's a lot more complicated than that, unfortunately. And since very recently, I've joined NIM Technologies as chief scientist, so now we will also be building privacy technologies, not just designing them on paper. All right. So, I mean, you all know the Lightning Network. The way I look at it is as a graph of payments. And in this case, okay, so you all know, two nodes that have a payment channel, they can do payments with each other. If they don't, they route payments through other intermediaries. In this example, the red node wants to pay the green node, and therefore is going to find a path in the network, such as through the two yellow nodes, to perform this payment. All right, so the first thing is that, so Lightning is source routed. So that means that the sender, in this case the red node, is choosing the full path all the way to the destination. Now, to do this, to make these choices, to build this path, that means that the red node needs to know the full graph, otherwise it's not able to find the path. And it also means that it has all the decision power, and these paths are built not randomly, but trying to optimize for cost, so that you don't have to pay extra money for your payment in fees. All right. So in terms of privacy, one of the desirable properties here is that no third parties should be able to see who's paying whom. So if red is paying to green, no third parties such as the orange nodes or the blue nodes or somebody who's not even part of Lightning Network, but is just looking at the network messages that are exchanged, they shouldn't know who's paying, that red is paying green. All right, so I consider two adversaries here. So the one is the global network adversary. So this is an adversary that can see the traffic in the internet. So this is basically telecommunications providers, internet exchanges, autonomous systems, the NSA, companies like Palantir that have surveillance software all over the network, entities running DPA, deep packet inspection boxes, all of those. Those are the global network adversaries. They only see encrypted traffic, so they only see the from, the time, and the length, but not actually the content. And the second adversary are other nodes, in this case the intermediaries, the orange nodes, that they see the predecessor and the successor, a payment identifier, payment amount, and the time, but they are not able to see the sender or the original sender or the final receiver of the payment. All right, so let's look at how Lightning is performing against these adversaries. All right. So towards the global network eavesdropper, and this was already mentioned in the previous talk, so I will expand on that. So basically, okay, payment amounts are hidden because by encryption, so that's good. But if the adversary, in addition, has one single corrupted node in the route, they would already get information about the payment. But the fact that the red is paying to green is actually trivially observable for an adversary with these capabilities, because they basically would see that red is sending a message without having received anything before, and then that message is fastly relayed to the next hop, and then to the next hop, and then something comes back, and then basically the adversary is able to see what's going on. The faster transactions propagate, the easier this attack becomes, because if you have transactions propagating slow, maybe orange is receiving 2 messages and then sending 2 out, and then it's not quite easy to see which corresponds to what. But if it's fast, then it's quite easy, actually, to trace end to end. And private channels that don't make much of a difference, because this adversary is able to see that nodes in this graph are also having transactions, and if there is not a link in the public graph, that means that a private link exists, and therefore they can complete their own version of the graph saying, okay, there is a private channel that is not advertised, but I can see that it exists because these two nodes are executing a protocol that has a traffic fingerprint that is consistent with making a payment. All right, so this is towards the global network adversary. What about malicious intermediaries? Can be one or can be more of these orange nodes. So the payment amounts are visible to them, minus fees. And they also get to see a persistent linkable payment identifier. So that means that even if they are not adjacent in the route, they are able to tell that they're in the same payment route. So that's not so good. Now, I heard that there is a proposal now to use better crypto to blind this identifier such that this linkability is not there. However, and this is usually something with crypto that it solves the problem on the cryptographic layer, but what about side channels, right? So in this case, you could still use the timing and the amount of the transaction in order to know if you have two nodes in the same route that are not adjacent, you might be able to correlate the payment based on timing and amount. And again, the faster it is, the easier it is to correlate, because then the closer in time it is, the more information you have. All right. What about anonymity? Can these intermediaries determine who's paying who? And the anonymity principle in Lightning Network is that, okay, they use Sphinx, which actually hides can hide the root length and the position. So that means that the first orange node, when it receives the message from red, cannot tell whether red is the originator or just forwarding, okay? So the predecessor might or might not be the originator, and the successor might or might not be the recipient. Okay, so there is uncertainty here about identity of sender and receiver, and therefore we can say that this enables anonymity towards intermediaries, right? Great. Okay, let's maybe think a little bit more about this. All right, is this true? And when I first saw Lightning Network, this reminded me of Crowds. So Crowds is a system from '98 from Reiter and Rubin. And Crowds has exactly this anonymity principle that people forward transactions to each other, and you don't know if your predecessor is the initiator or not. Now, Crowds has a very different design from Lightning Network. It's not source routed, it's actually hop-by-hop routing. It's fully connected. It's not a graph that has no full connections. And the paths are random walks that don't have a specific destination, because you just end up in some random destination that you will use as proxy to access the web. So it's quite a different system, actually, and even though Crowds does provide some anonymity, it's kind of weak anonymity because it is subject to certain attacks, like root capture, predecessor attacks, and so on. So it does provide something, but it's a little bit weak. How does that translate to the Lightning Network? So if we look at this again, so from the perspective of the node X, which is the first orange node in the route, when it looks at the predecessor, it says, okay, maybe red is the originator, or maybe somebody connected to red, or maybe somebody before, okay? And the receiver may be Y, or maybe somebody connected to Y, or somebody beyond that. And from the perspective of Y, again, the sender might be the predecessor, X, or somebody connected to X, and the successor might be green, or somebody connected to green. All right, now the problem here is that these, so the full graph is known to everybody, because otherwise entities cannot do source routing. So all participants know which are the shortest paths and what are the costs of paths. This is public information. And the paths are chosen without much randomness, in the sense that they are chosen to optimize for certain factors. So they will not be very long, and they will try to make choices that optimize for something that is not anonymity. So effectively, I mean, and I chose a bit of a degenerate case for my example just to make the point. For example, from the perspective of X, if we are assuming that all the fees are the same and all the costs are the same and we are optimizing for cost, you would see that, okay, who's connected to red is A and B, but A is connected to X as well. So if A was making a payment through this path, it would not go through red. It would just connect directly to X. And the other one is B, and okay, the X knows that the payment is going from red to Y, and then B is also connected to Y. So why would B go through red and X if it's paying something to Y? So therefore, you can eliminate A and B, and by extension, anybody before them, and therefore determine that actually red is the originator of the transaction. Okay, so X knows that the predecessor is the originator. We can do the same for Y, and we look at green. If green is not the end destination, it would be C, D, or E, but all of those are connected to Y directly, so why would that transaction go through green? It doesn't make sense. So actually, green has to be the successor. So basically, we have a lot less anonymity than we thought, and if the adversary controls both X and Y, he would actually know the full path, the full route, okay? So this is plus the amount. So that's not so private. And private channels make it actually worse. This was already mentioned in the previous talk, because if the private channel is only known by one person, then that person, the person using it, has to be the originator. Nobody else would be able to use it. So, okay, I think what we can say is that it provides plausible deniability, but not really anonymity in some cases. So let's recap. So the global network eavesdropper can see who sends payments to whom and can see the private channels. And the corrupt intermediaries can determine that they are part of the same routes. There may be some plausible deniability for some senders and some recipients, depending on their positioning in the topology, depending on whether there are more than one shortest path routes that they can take. Then that would be not an exact match, and maybe you have 2, 3, 5. But 2, 3, 5, I'm sorry, this is a very small anonymity set. This is not anonymity. This is plausible deniability. Okay? This means I'm not sure about who was the originator. For me, when I speak about anonymity, I'm expecting anonymity sets of thousands at least. That thousands of people could be the originator. Like this is too small, basically, to offer meaningful protection. So there is too little uncertainty, and this is because of short routes, and that are not random but selected to optimize for something. And this is worse if the topology becomes more star-like, because then you would have shorter routes still. So it would be easy for the one in the middle to know that they are, who's the end and the receiver and the sender and the receiver. And the problem is that the sort of anonymity property that Lightning is trying to build on, this principle of I have uncertainty over predecessor and successor, this only works if you have long random walks. Long random walks, okay? So imagine the Lightning network is fully connected, and now you go through 100 nodes, then yeah, then you have some anonymity, because now, what's the chance that my predecessor is the originator is very low. But you have to go to that kind of level, so it's actually very little protection that is being offered with the current kind of parametrization and the fact that these random walks are not random and not long, effectively. Yeah, and the private channel is trivially reveal the sender. All right, so what can we do? Is there a hope? Can we do something? So I have good and bad news here. So one thing we can do is use an anonymous transport layer, and this was, I think, hinted in the previous presentation as well. Anonymous transport layer offers anonymous channels that effectively have unlinkability between inputs and outputs. So that means that the adversary is observing the network, sees inputs into the network, sees outputs from the network, and is not able to match which input corresponds to which output, okay? So what kind of anonymous transport layers do we have? I mean, there is Tor. I guess most of you know it. Tor is great, but Tor, unfortunately, does not protect you against global network adversaries. Tor has a different threat model, and Tor does not delay messages and does not use padding, dummy traffic, and that means that it's possible, if the adversary sees the very beginning at the very end of the connection, by counting packets and doing timing correlations, it's actually quite easy to do end-to-end correlations. So Tor is unfortunately not very well suited for providing strong anonymity towards this adversary model that can see the full network. So here's where you can use mixnets, and the project I'm working on, NIM Technologies, we are actually developing and implementing a mixnet. The mixnet we're implementing is based on loopix. It's packet-based instead of circuit-based, so that means that when you send multiple packets, they go through different paths, and therefore that makes traceability of traffic flows much harder. By the way, Sphinx is also the routing used by Lightning Network, so that would make integration easy. We use continuous time mixes. So if you have heard of mixes, you probably think of Chaumian mixes that take n inputs, shuffle, and output a permutation. Those have certain limitations, and continuous time mixes have some nice properties, like, for example, as a sender, I can predict when my message will be delivered. So this can be important if you have latency constraints in your application. In Chaumian mixes that just take n inputs, you're depending on whether these other n-1 inputs are arriving, so it's beyond your control. Here you can actually know when your message will be delivered, and they produce very large anonymity sets because it's not like n in and out. Like whenever a message comes in, all the messages for the future for quite a long time could possibly be the input. So you have anonymity sets that are much larger with continuous time mixes. We use a network topology that offers very nice anonymity and scalability properties if you need to have more capacity. And we also use dummy traffic. So that basically means that even if the adversary sees that the nodes are sending or receiving traffic, it's not able to actually determine whether something is going on or is just bogus activity, effectively. And we also have anonymous replies, which could be very interesting, I think, for extending beyond the basic case that I'm explaining here of using anonymous channel to protect against global network eavesdroppers. The other important thing is that the NIM is aiming to be an infrastructure that supports multiple applications. So it's not just for the Lightning Network, right? It would be for many applications. You imagine messaging applications, file sharing applications, cryptocurrency transactions, a thing that broadcasts to the Bitcoin network, a VPN provider. Imagine many applications, all of them using the same anonymous channel such that their user bases are blended in one big anonymity set. Like if you want to have meaningful anonymity, you need to have big anonymity sets that are big and diverse. This is what gives you good anonymity. So before the previous speaker mentioned, okay, we want an anonymity set of all the Bitcoin nodes, I would say, why stop there? You want an anonymity set with everybody else, even if they are not Bitcoin nodes, even if they are not part of Bitcoin and they are in other applications, that would even conceal the fact that you are using Bitcoin, because the fact of using this network doesn't say anything because there are so many things that you could be doing with it. All right. So with respect to the global network adversary, we would be able to see traffic being sent and received by nodes, but not on which link these are sent. So basically, you see these nodes sending traffic to the mixnet, receiving traffic from the mixnet, but you cannot tell with which neighbor they are communicating effectively. And if you're using dummy traffic, then it becomes even harder, because the fact that they are doing something doesn't mean that something is happening at all. In this way, the private links remain private, because when I see activity, I cannot link that two nodes are actually executing the protocol. And if you have a private node that doesn't have any public links advertised to the rest of the network, then you can be completely unobservable for the adversary, particularly if you're using a channel that has other applications, because then the fact of using the channel doesn't reveal that you're actually engaging in Lightning Network transactions. Of course, there are trade-offs here. If you want to have high anonymity, you either have to have more dummy traffic or more latency tolerance. And this is kind of the triangle of anonymity. Either you have covered traffic or you have high latency, and that will determine how much anonymity you're able to achieve. And of course, it's always very important to have volume, to have many users, diverse users. This is crucial to any anonymity system. With respect to intermediaries, I'm afraid this is actually harder to solve. It's possible to hide IP addresses of nodes, but to hide the logical addresses on the Lightning Network graph, I think this will require important modifications because of this inherent lack of entropy of this graph, or it would require very long random walks in this payment graph, but that has implications that are economic, so I'm not sure to what extent that is feasible. Okay, so coming to the conclusion, the current Lightning Network does not offer payment privacy towards network adversaries. Network adversaries can determine who pays who. It offers very low or even no privacy towards intermediaries, in particular intermediaries that are close to sender or receiver. They will, with very high probability, be able to determine that their adjacent node is sender or receiver. Private channels are not really helping for this, and using a mixnet to communicate between Lightning Network nodes would kind of solve one of the vector of attacks towards one of these adversaries, which is the global network adversary. So that vector would be gone. Unfortunately, for protecting against intermediaries, we might have to do more work than just using a secure anonymous transport channel. Thank you very much. Time. Is there time for questions?
Yeah, we've got time for one. Yeah, let's just.
Yeah, thanks for the talk. You mentioned Onion Router, that is the one used by Lightning Network, but I would like to ask you about other networks, such as ZeroNet or other anonymity networks. Do you think are really anonymous?
So, I mean, of the anonymity networks that are deployed, the one that I take seriously is Tor. because it has a large user base. It's very well researched. It's very well designed. It has a lot of documentation, and it has been, I mean, I have studied it for years, actually. There are many projects out there that are trying to, but the problem I have with those is that they're usually not using a very clear principle for why they're providing anonymity. Their models and documentation is not very clear. And therefore, I mean, if you don't have a system that is well-defined and has well-defined properties and threat models and has a design that is kind of evolving because everybody's kind of adding things, it becomes very difficult to analyze. I mean, after working for 20 years in anonymity, you will not get it by chance right. So even, you know, with lots of focused minds on that is difficult. So I don't have much trust on these small projects that are not kind of having a very clear argument, scientific argument of why they're secure.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Yep.